Chapter 25 Rock, Root, and Rage. The golden arches and pillars of the fairy palace could barely contain the anxieties growing inside them. The 7 colorful fairies of the fairy council paced around the main hall away from their respected podiums, desperately trying to come up with an overdue solution to the crisis at hand. "A whole territory has been destroyed," Xanthio said. The flames on his head and shoulders were flickering wildly. "We need to find her." "Every corner of the kingdom has been searched twice, and there's still no trace of her," said Emeralda. "But what would we do if we found her?" Skyline said. "We're no match for the Enchantress." "Our magic is useless against her," Rosette said, "and she grows more powerful every day." "We must do something. Anything," Xanthios demanded. "The world is counting on us." Tangerina has grown tired of his complaint. Even her bees were irritated and flew around her beehive with their singers out. "Then why don't you think of something to do?" she said. "We've all been here for days trying to come up with a practical solution. It's not like we're keeping anything from you." If we can't come up with a practical solution, then I suggest we come up with an impractical solution," Xanthios half-heartedly suggested. "Let's fight her at our own game. Who cares about honoring our fairy values?" The flames on Xanthios' shoulders flickered faster as he thought about it. "The world has always looked to us to handle its troubles with peace and understanding. We cannot abandon those morals now. That's what the Enchantress wants," Emeralda said. "You can't extinguish a fire by adding more flame. You of all people should know that, Xanthios." "Then if we can't use our magic to stop her, let's gather all the witches and warlocks from the Dwarf Wars and Pinocchio Prison and have them defeat her," he proposed. Emeralda's massaged her forehead. "You want to set loose the witches and warlocks that we imprison?" she asked them. Xanthios' flames diminished as he slumped. She didn't have to elaborate for him to realize how bad an idea that was. "Any more bright ideas?" Tangerina asked him. Xanthios turned to respond to her, but had nothing to say. They were at a dead end. "What if we can't come up with an answer?" Corals asked in a tiny voice, cuddling her pet walking fish. "Will all of us perish if we can't stop her?" The solution had finally reached a point that forced them to consider the consequences of failing. Emeralda eyed her fellow fairies, angered by their sudden hopelessness. "Shame on all of you," Emeralda said, and walked around the room. She stared directly into each of their eyes as she passed them. "We are the Fairy Council. If we lose our hope, all hope for the rest of the world is good as gone. We cannot spend a moment humoring thoughts of failure. As long as someone remains standing with a noble heart, there will always be a way for good to triumph over evil." The other fairies looked around at one another, inspired by Emeralda's words. Moments like these were the reasons why Emeralda was the head of the Fairy Council. A small magenta flame abruptly appeared on the floor of the main hall. It all came out in thin air and didn't appear to be burning anything but the air around it. Emeralda gazed down at it and cautiously stepped away. "Brace yourself," she said, and her green eyes grew large. "We're about to have company." With a giant blast, the purple flame rapidly grew into a roaring magenta fire that covered the majority of the room. The fairies screamed and shielded themselves from the blaze. A split second later, the flames vanished and the Enchantress appeared. The fairies froze with fear. Ismia always knew how to make an entrance. "It's good to be home," Ismia laughed and looked around the room of all the frightened faces of her own peers. "For people who I thought I was dead, you never looked happy to see me." Emeralda was the only fairy brave enough to address her. "Why have you come here, Ismia?" The Enchantress ignored the question. "Oh, look," Ismia said happily. She strode to a forgotten golden chair that had been pushed to the side of the room. "It's my old seat from when I was on the Fairy Council. Remember those days?" "You certainly show your true colors since," Emeralda said. "You act as if you're all so flawless," Ismia sneered. "I can see right through that pathetic facade of a perfect and loving family. I know how spiteful you can be when no one is looking. I sat in this room for hours every day trying to make the world a better place, just as much as the rest of you. But why did you target me with your cruelty? Why was I treated so poorly by the people who were supposed to be perfect? No one, because you became vindictive, Esmeralda said. No, Esmea said and shook her head. It was because I became better. I was more powerful, more gifted, and more liked than any of you could ever be. When the fairy godmother announced me as her heir, you acted as if I had done something horrible to you. She put me on a pedestal, and you all isolated me in there. As your ability grew, so did your ego, Esmeralda said. You thought you were above us. You even renounced your title as a fairy. You're the ones who renounced me as long before I ever did, Esmea said and glared at her. You ignored me, excluded me, and hated me from the minute I arrived. The world may be convinced you had nothing to do with my change of career, but I will always know the truth. You made it impossible for me to be anything but disdained. The Enchantress ran a finger on the arm of her old chair, remembering all the painful memories of her time as a fairy. The cruelest thing you can do to someone is force them to hurt alone. And you left me hurting on my own many times, Esmea said. Every time I was heartbroken, I would go to the rest of you hoping to receive some compassion. But you let your jealousies get in the way and showing any sympathy. You actually enjoyed watching me suffer, relishing the fact that something was distressing me. Esmeralda surprised the Enchantress and the other fairies with what she said next. She didn't deny it. I admit that even we were guilty of being less than perfect at times, Esmeralda said. But as we've grown from our mistakes, your mistakes have only grown. Esmea snorted and slowly clapped in Esmeralda's direction. Touché, the Enchantress said. You managed to admit you were wrong and scold me in one breath. You're good at this leadership thing, Em. No wonder they replaced me with you. I was not a replacement, Esmeralda said. You were never what this council needed. No, I was never what this council wanted, Esmea said sharply. They choose you, Esmeralda, because you are more beautiful, and the world always listened to a pretty face over an average one. And even though I changed my appearance and gained beauty over time, they still choose you over me, because you were easier to control. You were the fairy godmother's puppet I could never be. Esmeralda returned her scornful stare. I'd rather be a toy than a tyrant, Esmea, she said, but I'm assuming you didn't come here to reminisce. So what brings you to our kingdom? A small grin appeared on the Enchantress's face. She was delighted to get a rise out of the fairy. The truth is, I've become rather bored waiting for you and all the others gradually hand their kingdoms over to me, Esmea said, taking a seat in her old chair. I decided to invite them all to the new home I'm building for myself and get it all over with. I'm anxious for this whole world thing to conclude as much as you all are. None of us are going anywhere with you, Xanthio said, and his flames rose. A cunning smirk grew in the Enchantress's face. Oh, yes, you are, Esmea said. It's not an option. The Enchantress snapped her fingers, and the ground started to rumble with the power of a dozen earthquakes. All the fairies looked to one another, petrified what was coming their way. Clusters of vines exploded out of the floor and seized the fairies in the room. They desperately tried to free themselves, struggling against the plants with all their might and all their magic, but it was no use. The plants were too strong to escape. Esmea roared with laughter as she watched the vines coil around each fairy council member and dragged them into the ground. Esmeralda shook her hands to the ground to prevent the vines from dragging her away. You won't win, Esmea, she said. Oh, but I will, the Enchantress said, looking down at her with a smile in her eyes. You see, I'm finally building my own pedestal, but this time, rather than admiration, I'm building it from rock, root, and rage. Things were gloomy as ever at the charming palace. All the other rulers had gone home after the happily ever after assembly meeting. Except for Sleeping Beauty, he had no choice but to stay. She sat with Cinderella in her chambers, quietly confronting the distraught mother. "It's almost been 2 weeks since that horrible woman took my daughter away from me," Cinderella said. "I never thought I could feel like this inside. I never thought I could be so miserable." Sleeping Beauty dabbed the tears spilling from her friend's tired eyes. "You have to stay strong," Cinderella said. Sleeping Beauty said, "We have to be brave for our people." Cinderella blew her nose into a handkerchief. "But who is supposed to be brave for us at a time like this?" she asked. "When the rest of the world is looking to us for strength and guidance, who do we look up to for reassurance?" Sleeping Beauty gently took Cinderella's hand in her own. "We have to inspire each other," she said. Cinderella patted her friend's hand and placed her hand on Sleeping Beauty's shoulders. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," Cinderella said. Sir Lantern stepped into the Queen's chambers. His face was so long the Queen knew he wasn't bearing good news. "What is it, Sir Lantern?" Cinderella asked, bracing herself for whatever it was. "More bad news, I'm afraid, Your Majesty," he said. "I just received a letter from Sir Grant in the Northern Kingdom. Apparently Enchantress attacked the Northern Kingdom last night after attacking Troll and Goblin territory. They woke up this morning to discover all their crops have been poisoned." "Dear God," Sleeping Beauty said, and placed a hand on her chest. "Does the Enchantress have no soul?" "Queen Snow White has asked that we send what we can," Lantern added. "Yes, of course," Cinderella said. "Gather as much food as the kingdom can spare." The ground under the palace began to shake. Cinderella's chambers rattled as something moved through the palace toward her chambers. "What on earth?" Lantern said, staring down the floor as it began to crack under her feet. He retrieved his sword, although it was useless against what was coming. Vines burst through the floor and slithered up to Queen Cinderella and Queen Sleeping Beauty. They wrapped around them and dragged them back where they had come from. Sir Lantern tried rescuing the queens, but it all happened too quickly to prevent. He looked through the cracks in the floor. He could see vines dragging and screaming queens several floors through the palace and into the ground where they disappeared out of sight. The ground began to rumble again, this time not from something directly below the palace, but something much farther from the distance. Lantern ran over the cracks to the window to see what was causing all this commotion. Miles away in the northern part of the charming kingdom, a gargantuan pillar made of rock, roots, and dirt emerged from the ground and rocketed into the air. The land cracked and elevated eventually for miles and miles around. The pillar grew higher and higher, only stopping once it had reached the clouds. A massive Colosseum was at the top of the pillar, constructed of enormous jagged stones sharp like arrowheads. Vines and thorn bushes grew up the side the pillar, taking with them all the rulers they had seized from around the world. The Enchantress sat out on the center of the Colosseum on her old fairy council chair like it was a throne. The plants arrived with her guests, pinned them around the walls at various heights and angles around her. The abducted kings, queens, and fairies were now prisoners in Asmia's vengeful earthy web. True to her word, the Enchantress had built herself a pedestal made of the deepest parts of earth, powered by the deepest angers of her soul. Alright, that is the end of Chapter 5. I hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more from The Land of Stories, The Enchantress Returns, and more books to come. Also, if you want to hear more, give me more suggestions to read, comment down below, and hopefully give me some great ones. And overall, I hope you have a wonderful day and enjoy the reading. Bye!